The most evil man in history never existed. For 500 years, you've been taught to fear a monster named Machiavelli, but here's what's about to shatter everything. The real Machiavelli was actually trying to protect you from the exact people who've been using his name to justify their behavior. And when you understand his real lessons, you'll discover why the people calling others Machiavellian are usually the ones you should worry about. How to spot truly dangerous people versus just effective ones, and why the most moral thing you can do sometimes feels least virtuous. These lessons change lives when people really understand them. Here's what most people think they know about Machiavelli. He said, "The ends justify the means." He wrote the playbook for dictators. He's basically the grandfather of every movie villain who strokes a white cat while plotting world domination. Every single one of those things is wrong. And here's your first life-changing insight. The people who ban truth-telling are usually the ones the truth exposes. Think about it. The Prince was immediately banned by the Catholic Church when it was published. It was condemned across Europe. Why would a handbook for tyrants be banned by tyrants? Because it wasn't a handbook for tyrants. It was an instruction manual for recognizing them. This pattern shows up everywhere in your life. The boss who forbids negative talks about company problems. Apparently optimism is a corporate mandate now. The partner who says you're being too critical when you point out their behavior. The politician who calls unflattering news fake. They're not protecting you from harmful information. They're protecting themselves from uncomfortable truth. But there's something even more important you need to understand about how power really works. And it starts with a word that most people completely misunderstand. When you hear virtue, you probably think of moral goodness, being honest, keeping promises, treating people fairly. Machiavelli had a different word for this kind of virtue. He called it a luxury that reality rarely affords. The virtue Machiavelli talked about wasn't moral virtue. It was virtu. This means skill, excellence, and effectiveness in achieving your goals. Think of it as competence with a backbone. And here's the uncomfortable part. Traditional moral virtue and effective leadership often contradict each other. Let's say you're leading a company. You discover that being completely honest about financial problems will cause a panic. This panic will destroy thousands of jobs. But careful disclosure allows you to fix things and save everyone. Traditional virtue says tell everything immediately. Machiavellian virtue says manage the truth strategically for the better outcome. Which choice actually serves more people? Machiavelli isn't saying lying is good. He's saying something more sophisticated. If you insist on always applying moral absolutes to complex situations, you'll often cause more harm than good. Then you can feel virtuous while standing in the ruins of what you were trying to protect, which is, admittedly, excellent for the ego. This is the virtue trap. It's believing good intentions automatically lead to good outcomes, no matter how skillfully those intentions are pursued. Think about every well-meaning leader you've watched fail spectacularly. Every moral crusade that created more suffering than it prevented. Every time someone chose to be right rather than effective. The lesson here is brutal but necessary. Good intentions without effectiveness is just expensive self-congratulation. His argument wasn't that morality doesn't matter. It was that morality without effectiveness is useless. Being virtuous in a way that guarantees your defeat doesn't make you moral. It makes you ineffective. Sometimes moral responsibility means getting your hands dirty. Sometimes it means making choices that don't fit into your neat framework. Sometimes it means accepting that the world is more complicated than your principles account for. But here's what's really going to challenge everything you think about success and failure. And it has to do with something Machiavelli understood that most people still don't. Now let's talk about fortune and preparation. Fortune isn't just random chance. It's everything you can't control. Economic crashes, pandemics, technological disruptions, sudden betrayals, unexpected opportunities. It's everything that happens to you rather than because of you. Most people treat fortune like weather, something that just happens, something you endure or enjoy but can't really influence. You get lucky or you don't. You're in the right place at the right time or you aren't. It's a very Zen approach to life, if Zen meant helpless. Machiavelli thought this was dangerously naive. His famous metaphor compared fortune to a river. Sometimes it flows gently, but sometimes it floods, destroying everything in its path. But you can build dikes and channels to control where the flood goes. You can't control fortune, but you can prepare for it. This is why his advice sounds paranoid. He's constantly talking about maintaining escape routes, keeping potential allies happy, preparing for betrayal. To us, this sounds like expecting the worst from everyone. But Machiavelli wasn't paranoid. He was probabilistic. In any complex system involving humans, things will go wrong. Not because people are evil, but because interests change and circumstances shift. Some organizations built flexibility that allowed them to pivot during COVID. Others had optimized so heavily for normal conditions they collapsed when normal disappeared. The difference wasn't luck. It was preparedness for unluckiness. What we learn from this: you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how ready you are for what happens to you. His solution was elegant: pessimistic preparation with optimistic action. Plan for things to go wrong, but act with confidence when they go right. Build systems that handle failure but execute assuming success. Success isn't about avoiding difficulty. Success is developing the capability to respond effectively to whatever actually happens. Fortune favours the prepared, but preparation favours those who accept that fortune exists. And this brings us to the most misunderstood question in all of leadership. One that will completely change how you think about influence and authority. Now, the most misunderstood question in political philosophy: is it better to be loved or feared? You probably think you know Machiavelli's answer. Everyone does. He said it's better to be feared, right? Wrong. Here's what Machiavelli actually wrote: it would be best to be both loved and feared. But since this is difficult to achieve, if you must choose one, it is safer to be feared than loved. Notice the key word, safer. Not better, not more effective, not morally superior, safer. And notice what he says first: it would be best to be both loved and feared. That's the goal. The either-or choice is what you settle for when you can't achieve the optimal outcome. But he immediately warns that if you choose fear, you must never be hated. Fear and hatred are completely different things. Fear is respect for your capability to impose consequences. Hatred is what happens when people perceive your power as arbitrary, cruel, or self-serving. Think about the difference between a coach who demands excellence and will bench you, versus one who humiliates players for entertainment. Both might produce fear, but only one produces functional fear that improves performance. Most people who think they're choosing to be feared are actually choosing to be hated. They confuse cruelty with strength. They confuse unpredictability with power. This reveals something crucial. Real power comes from being respected, not from being scary. The leadership paradox exists at every level. You have influence over family, colleagues, friends. Every time you exercise that influence, you're balancing compassion with accountability, support with challenge, kindness with honesty. Sometimes being loving means setting boundaries. Sometimes being supportive means saying no. Sometimes being helpful means letting people face consequences. The goal isn't to be loved or feared, it's to be effective. And effectiveness requires flexibility to adapt your style to what situations actually demand. But there's something that makes people even more uncomfortable than talking about fear and love. And it's something that affects every single interaction you have. Here's what really makes people uncomfortable: Machiavelli's analysis of appearance versus reality. People judge you based on what they see, not what you are. They respond to your reputation more than your character, your image more than your actions. This isn't because people are shallow. They don't have direct access to your inner reality. They can only work with available information, which is largely how you present yourself and what others say about you. Managing appearances isn't shallow manipulation. It's necessary communication. You have valuable qualities and capabilities, but if you can't convey them effectively, they might as well not exist. Your good intentions don't matter if they're invisible. Your expertise doesn't help anyone if it's not credible to people who need it. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. This drives idealistic people crazy. It seems to suggest image matters more than substance. But if good people refuse to manage their image effectively, they'll consistently lose influence to people who manage image well but lack substance. Think about every election where the better candidate lost because they were terrible at communication. Every workplace where the most competent person got passed over because they couldn't articulate their value. It's like being fluent in a language nobody speaks. Here's the takeaway that changes everything: if you can't communicate your value, you don't have any. The goal isn't creating a false image. It's ensuring your true value is visible and comprehensible. This means understanding how your behavior is likely interpreted, communicating in ways your audience can understand, being strategic about when and how you reveal different aspects of yourself. Different situations require different personas. Qualities making you effective in crisis might seem cold in normal times. Openness building trust with your team might appear weak to competitors. His solution was contextual authenticity, being genuinely yourself while adapting presentation to what each situation requires. Not changing who you are, but being thoughtful about which aspects to emphasize in different contexts. Let's pause for just a breath. We release weekly videos exploring the timeless mechanics of power, from ancient empires to the instincts that still trigger fear, loyalty, and desire. We follow the architects of control, the performers of ritual, the legends of will. Some are icons, some you've never heard of, all shape the world you live in, if you like focused storytelling. Historical insight and a wink of visual irony, subscribe and join us as we decode the Power Playbook one story at a time. This connects directly to the most practical insight Machiavelli ever shared about human relationships. Now let's address trust and human reliability. People aren't evil, but they are fundamentally self-interested. When self-interest conflicts with loyalty or principles, self-interest usually wins. This isn't cynicism. It's basic psychology that modern research confirms repeatedly. Machiavelli's solution wasn't to stop trusting people. It was to structure relationships so other people's self-interest aligned with yours. Create what we might call incentive-compatible trust. Trust people to act in their interests and arrange things so their interests overlap with yours. This is more reliable than naive trust. People's self-interest is more predictable than their moral convictions. It's more sustainable because it doesn't require people to sacrifice their well-being for yours. It's more honest because it acknowledges everyone has legitimate concerns beyond their relationship with you. Instead of expecting employees to be loyal personally, create structures making their success dependent on organizational success. Instead of expecting partners to honor agreements from friendship, build contracts making violations costly and compliance profitable. It's amazing what clarity a well-designed incentive can provide. The insight here is powerful. Design relationships so that doing right by you is the smart thing for them to do. The trust equation isn't about trusting or distrusting people. It's about understanding what makes trust possible and sustainable. Everyone, including you, is fundamentally self-interested. The question isn't how to transcend self-interest. It's how to structure it so it serves larger purposes. But there's one more insight that ties everything together, and it's about the most dangerous force in human experience. Power is simultaneously the most important tool for creating positive change, and the most corrupting force in human experience. You need it to accomplish anything significant, but acquiring it tends to make you less capable of using it wisely. When you gain power, several things happen automatically. You start receiving filtered information. People tell you what they think you want to hear. You experience less accountability. Fewer people can tell you when you're wrong. You feel more entitled to get your way. You lose touch with what it feels like to be powerless. If you find yourself with authority, actively counteract these tendencies. Seek information contradicting your assumptions. Create accountability mechanisms not depending on others' willingness to challenge you. Regularly remind yourself what it feels like to be on the receiving end of power. Here's what you need to remember. Power doesn't corrupt people who are already wise. It reveals people who aren't. These dynamics operate at every level. If you're a manager, parent, teacher, or anyone with authority over others, you're vulnerable to the same distortions that corrupt world leaders. People who use power well do so despite their power, not because of it. So what does this mean for your actual 21st century life? Every organization has official hierarchy and unofficial hierarchy. Pay more attention to who actually influences decisions than to org charts. Who do decision makers seek advice from? Who gets calls returned quickly? This isn't about becoming a scheming politician. It's about understanding how your organization works so you can be effective within it. Pay attention to how informal power structures are changing. Develop relationships with currently undervalued people likely to become important. For social media and personal branding, be intentional about your online presence. This doesn't mean crafting a false persona. It means being thoughtful about which aspects of your authentic self to emphasize publicly. In relationships, create situations where both people's individual fulfillment serves the relationship's success. Support each other's goals. Divide responsibilities according to preferences. Love isn't enough if practical arrangements consistently frustrate one or both partners. For personal development, build anti-fragility. The ability not just to survive disruption, but benefit from it. Maintain multiple income streams. Develop diverse skills. Create systems handling both success and failure. Accept that the world is more complex and less controllable than our culture suggests. Develop comfort with ambiguity. Tolerance for paradox. Skill at making decisions with incomplete information. Here's what Machiavelli actually offers. A toolkit for navigating complexity without losing integrity or abandoning values. A framework for making difficult decisions without pretending they're simple. Realistic thinking that acknowledges people are complicated and self-interested. Optimistic thinking suggesting that understanding how people work allows building systems bringing out their better qualities. The alternative isn't moral purity. It's naive idealism that consistently fails and blames failure on others' moral deficiencies. The most practical thing you can do is see clearly, see power as it actually operates, relationships as they actually function, yourself as you actually are. This isn't cynical, it's compassionate. It allows working with people as they are rather than being frustrated by their failure to be who you think they should be. It allows building strategies accounting for human limitations rather than depending on human perfection. Machiavelli was teaching how to be idealistic about goals and realistic about methods, how to care deeply about outcomes while being flexible about approaches, how to maintain principles while adapting tactics to what actually works. The choice isn't between being good and being effective. The choice is between being effective at advancing your values and being ineffective at advancing your values. Everything else is elaborate self-congratulation. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. The man who wrote those words wasn't a villain. He was a realist who understood that appearance and reality operate according to different rules. 5 centuries later, we're still learning that lesson. Some of us anyway. And if you're one of the people who wants to keep learning these timeless principles of power, influence, and human nature, then Control Room is where you belong. Every week we dive deep into the strategies and insights that actually shape the world around you. Not the fairy tales, not the feel-good myths. The real patterns that determine who succeeds and who doesn't. Because once you start seeing clearly, you can't stop. And that's exactly what we're here for. Subscribe to Control Room now and join the people who choose to understand reality instead of just hoping it works out.